Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
It is so great to be here.
Okay, so I want you to imagine a guy strapping himself into like a crude mechanical wooden bird.
Right.
And he is standing on the balcony of a royal palace, looking out over this massive, heavily armed enemy battalion that has basically come to destroy the city.
Setting a very intense scene right out of the gate.
Yeah. Well, the crazy thing is, he is not a soldier. He has zero combat training. In fact, he's a weaver, like a guy who makes cloth for a living.
It's just a completely regular guy.
Exactly. But because of this completely out-of-control lie that he told to, impress a woman, the situation has escalated to the highest levels of government.
As these things often do.
Right. And now the entire kingdom believes he is the literal god Vishnu. So he has a choice to make.
A pretty massive choice.
Yeah, he can either confess the lie and be executed for treason, or he can fly this wooden bird directly into the enemy army and die trying to maintain the illusion.
And this is honestly one of the most absurd, but also high stakes and psychologically profound scenarios in all of ancient literature.
It really is.
And the wildest part is that he actually chooses to fly the bird. I mean, he chooses to die for the mask he's wearing.
That choice and what happens immediately after he makes it is going to be the centerpiece of our deep dive today.
I'm really looking forward to unpacking this one.
Me too. We are exploring a collection of ancient Indian texts known as the Panchatantra. Now, if you look this up online, you'll probably see it described as a book of animal fables.
Right, yeah. Talking turtles, cynical jackals, clever crows, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But we are definitely not reading bedtime stories today, are we?
Far from it. I mean, we really have to understand the historical reality that this text was born into.
Yeah, set the stage for us.
So the Panchatantra was fundamentally a manual for statecraft and survival. It was written as an instructional guide for young princes who were preparing to inherit kingdoms.
So high-stakes leadership training.
Exactly. These were young men who were going to be surrounded by, flatterers, usurpers, spies, assassins.
Not exactly a safe work environment.
No, not at all. And the author's goal wasn't to teach them how to be gentle or morally flawless. The goal was to teach them how to survive in a world entirely governed by deception, shifting alliances, and just ruthless human ambition.
So it's less like Aesop's fables and more like Machiavelli's The Prince.
That is a perfect comparison.
Just disguised with animal characters.
Yeah.
And that really brings us to the core mission of our analysis today. We are pulling a specific thread through these fragmented stories to examine one central theme, which is the architecture of the masks we wear.
The masks we wear, yeah.
I really want to look at how we construct these false identities, how they protect us, how they trap us, and ultimately how they manipulate the people around us.
Because the underlying premise the text presents is that every interaction involves some level of masking.
Right.
Whether a mask is worn for predatory reasons or out of audacious ambition or even just out of sheer blinding panic, the consequences rarely align with our original intentions.
They usually backfire in spectacular ways.
Exactly. And the text forces us to ask this really deeply uncomfortable question. Do we control our identities, or do the identities we project eventually assume control of us?
That is such a heavy question. And let's start answering that by looking at what I think is the most insidious kind of mask.
Okay, where are we starting?
We'll begin at the edge of a drying pond. The text introduces us to an old heron. Now, this bird's entire biological imperative, his livelihood, is catching and eating the fish and crabs in this pond.
That's his whole job.
Right. But he's old now, his joints ache, he's losing his speed, so he just stops hunting.
He just gives up.
Yeah, he just stands at the water's edge, completely still, projecting this aura of absolute devastating tragedy. And eventually, a crab scuttles up to him. And I love this detail. The text very deliberately refers to this crab as Uncle Crab.
Yeah, that specific phrasing, Uncle Crab, is so vital to understanding the dynamic here.
Why is that?
Well, it immediately establishes a sense of communal trust. It implies this sort of, neighborhood dynamic.
Right, like they're old acquaintances.
Exactly. Even though the heron is historically a predator, the crab addresses him with familial respect. The author is really highlighting a baseline level of social cohesion that is about to be violently exploited.
Exploit's the right word, because Uncle Crab asks the obvious question. He says, Why aren't you eating? You look terrible.
A very neighborly thing to ask.
Yeah, and the heron could just say, I'm old and I can't catch you. But instead, he executes this absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation.
It really is brilliant.
He tells the crab that he overheard some human fishermen talking. And according to the heron, these fishermen are coming tomorrow or the next day to completely drain the pond and kill everyone in it.
An existential threat.
Right. And because of this impending apocalypse, the heron claims he has lost his appetite. He is essentially staging a performative hunger strike out of grief for the very fish he normally murders.
We really need to dissect the psychological mechanics of what the heron is doing here because it is brilliant and terrifying.
Walk us through it.
He recognizes that his traditional method of brute force, physically chasing the fish is failing.
Because he's too old.
Right. So he pivots to asymmetric warfare. He weaponizes empathy. By claiming to grieve for the fish, he completely inverts his identity in the eyes of his prey.
He flips the script.
Completely. He stops being the predator and becomes a fellow victim in the face of a greater external threat. He adopts the mask of the ascetic, the pious elder who has transcended his basic biological instincts out of sheer moral sorrow.
I have to say, reading this, my mind immediately went to modern corporate strategy.
Oh, absolutely.
It is basically the ancient blueprint for aggressive corporate greenwashing.
Yes.
Like, consider a massive multinational company whose entire revenue model relies on, say, polluting a river system.
Sure. Very common scenario.
Suddenly, public opinion turns against them. New environmental regulations are looming. Their old way of doing business is fundamentally threatened.
Just like the old heron.
Exactly. So instead of actually changing their core operations, they launch a massive PR campaign. You've seen the commercials.
Oh, we all have.
With the soft acoustic guitar, the slow motion footage of trees, a voiceover talking about how much they just grieve for the changing climate.
Right, the manufactured empathy.
Yeah, they adopt this sudden moral high ground, claiming to be protectors of the environment, all while quietly lobbying to keep dumping waste in the river.
Let's push that analogy even further because it captures the exact mechanism the text is warning against.
Okay, let's do it.
The corporation, in your example, just like the heron, isn't just doing PR to look good. They are actively trying to shift the battlefield.
Well, yeah.
The core wisdom this fable imparts is a warning against the sudden piety of predators. The text is addressing a fundamental vulnerability in human neurology.
Which is what? Exactly.
Well, we are hardwired by evolution to drop our guard when someone speaks the language of moral virtue or shared anxiety.
Because if someone is crying over the exact same thing you were worried about, like the fisherman coming to drain the pond, you automatically assume they are an ally.
Exactly. You think, we are in the same foxhole.
Right. You completely forget that just last week, this guy was trying to eat you for breakfast.
Precisely. We confuse the performance of empathy with actual safety.
That is so dangerous.
It is. Vulnerability is rarely exploited by outright screaming aggression. You can see a charging lion, you know to run.
Right, it's obvious.
But you cannot see the trap when it is wrapped in a comforting embrace and a shared terror. The heron's mask works because it hijacks the crab's own existential terror.
He uses the crab's fear against him.
Yes. The crab is so focused on the imaginary fisherman that he invites the real predator into his confidence.
So bringing this out of the ancient pond and into the modern listener's life, if you are listening to this right now, I want you to evaluate the sudden shifts in behavior around you.
That's a great practical application.
Yeah, think about it. When someone in your professional circle, maybe a notoriously cutthroat colleague, suddenly starts talking about office community or organizing wellness retreats.
Or when a politician suddenly adopts the exact moral panic of their opponents.
Right. You have to ask yourself, what is the underlying livelihood they're trying to protect?
It really requires a suspension of our instinct to trust shared grief. It doesn't mean everyone is secretly a heron, of course.
No, we don't want to be completely paranoid.
Right, but it demands that we develop the discernment to look past the performance. We have to ask, what old strategy is failing this person, and what new advantage are they gaining by playing the saint?
We have to examine the mechanics of the relationship, not just the costume they are wearing.
The mechanics of the relationship. I love that phrasing.
Well, thank you, because that is a concept I want to carry directly into the city for our next story. Because this one features a relationship with some of the most audacious, literal mechanics I have ever encountered in ancient literature.
Oh, yes. The story of the weaver and the carpenter.
Yes, we're moving to the weaver and the carpenter.
This fable operates on so many interconnected levels. I mean, it deals with class, ambition, loyalty, and the dismantling of societal shame.
Let me set the scene for the listener because the visuals in this one are just striking.
They really are.
So we have a weaver, and he is hopelessly, desperately in love with the local princess.
A classic setup.
Right, and he is in a bad way. The text describes him sprawled on an unmade bed, shedding what it calls lingering tears and heaving burning sighs.
He is going through it.
He is the absolute picture of agonizing, unrequited love. Because he's fully aware that a common weaver can never approach royalty.
The class divide is insurmountable.
Exactly. But then, his best friend arrives. This is the carpenter. And the source specifically notes the carpenter walks in wearing an elegant costume. He sees his friend wasting away.
And the carpenter's immediate reaction is where the philosophical friction of this story begins.
How so?
He doesn't offer hollow sympathy. He demands to know the source of the suffering. And when the weaver is finally coaxed into admitting he's in love with someone infinitely far above his station, the carpenter delivers this incredible line.
Oh, I know the one.
It is one of the most profound definitions of loyalty in the entire text. He says, "No friend is he who compels a timid silence."
I kept reading that line over and over when I was prepping for this. No friend is he who compels a timid silence.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
It completely redefines what it means to be a supportive presence. But, and I really have to push back here on what happens next.
Oh, cool.
Because the philosophical sentiment is beautiful, but the carpenter's actual solution seems completely unhinged.
Unhinged in what way?
Well, he basically says, you want the princess, give me a few days. And he goes back to his workshop and constructs a mechanical flying wooden bird.
Yes, he does.
Specifically, he builds a replica of Garuda, the mythical bird mount of the supreme god Vishnu. The text mentions it has a pulling pin, which is essentially a joystick for steering.
It's an ancient flying machine.
Right. And he brings this flying machine back to the weaver and issues a set of instructions. He tells him to bathe, put on expensive scents, wear bright garlands, disguise himself as the god Vishnu, and fly this machine right onto the princess's balcony.
The audacity is off the charts.
I mean, he is telling his friend to commit high treason by sneaking into the royal palace and extreme blasphemy by impersonating a major deity.
Both capital offenses.
Exactly. So why is the text framing this carpenter as the ideal best friend? He's giving terrible, life-ruining advice.
I see where you're coming from. It feels like terrible advice. That's because we are looking at the literal risk, the treason, and the blasphemy.
Hard to ignore those.
Fair enough. But the author is using hyperbole to illustrate a specific architecture of audacity. To understand this, we have to translate it into modern realities.
Okay, help me bridge that gap.
The carpenter represents a very rare type of ally. Most friends are comfortable sitting on the edge of the unmade bed, offering platitudes, telling you there are plenty of other fish in the sea.
Essentially enabling your timid silence.
Yes, exactly. The carpenter refuses to do that. He represents the friend who provides active, audacious solutions to impossible problems.
Oh, I see. So it's the difference between a friend who hands you a telescope so you can stare at the moon and cry versus the friend who says, let's build a spaceship.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it, yes.
That makes a lot of sense.
Now, we must apply wisdom with discernment here, obviously.
Right, disclaimer time.
The text is a fable. It celebrates sacrilegious fraud to make a dramatic point. We obviously shouldn't take this literally and encourage our friends to commit identity theft to get a date.
Please don't do that.
No, but we should endorse the carpenter's proactive loyalty. The enduring wisdom is about the dismantling of shame.
Weaver's shame about his class.
Exactly. The weaver was dying of shame because his desire felt illegal due to his social standing. The carpenter looked at him and essentially said, "Your desire isn't shameful, it's an engineering problem. And I am an engineer, let's solve it."
Your desire isn't shameful, it's an engineering problem. I love that framing so much.
It changes everything.
It really does. It strips away the emotional paralysis and makes the goal actionable. And the crazy thing is, the engineering works.
It does indeed.
The weaver flies in. The princess is completely overwhelmed because, I mean, a glowing man on a flying wooden bird just landed on her balcony claiming to be a god, and they begin a secret relationship.
But as with all masks, the longer you wear them, the more the world interacts with the disguise rather than the person underneath.
That is the danger.
And that leads to the inevitable collapse of control.
Right. Because the secret doesn't stay secret. The royal guards notice changes in the princess's behavior. They inform the king and queen.
And here we had a very interesting textual detour.
Yeah, before the text reveals the parents' reaction, it embeds these incredibly melancholic verses about the nature of creation.
The poem verses.
Yeah, it compares the anxiety of having daughters to the anxiety of writing a poem. Now, let me read a fragment of the sentiment. It says, when a poem, the author is filled with a doubt, will she reach? Will she please?
This section presents a significant obstacle to growth for a modern reader, and we really need to address it head on.
Yeah, it was pretty flaring.
We immediately hit a wall with the cultural context. Modern listeners will rightfully resist this patriarchal framing.
Because it treats women like objects.
Exactly. The text treats daughters as a liability, as property whose primary function is to secure political alliances through marriage, bringing inherent anxiety to a family's reputation.
Right.
It's an uncomfortable artifact of the ancient setting.
I definitely struggle with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels incredibly reductive to compare a human child to a piece of poetry whose only job is to please an audience.
It is reductive.
But if we try to extract the underlying emotion, stripping away the patriarchal specifics, what is the text actually trying to say about the human experience?
If we look beneath that archaic social structure, we find a universal human terror regarding the vulnerability of creation.
Okay, unpack that for us.
The core emotion being described is the realization that the moment you release anything you've created into the world, you completely lose control over it.
Oh, wow. So whether it is raising a child, launching a startup, publishing a book, or pushing a piece of code live.
Yes, all of those things.
You pour your life into shaping it, but eventually it leaves your hands.
Yeah.
The moment it leaves your hands, it interacts with the world in ways you never intended and cannot protect it from.
Exactly. The king and queen's panic. I mean, the queen literally cries out, "You ruined the family," when she discovers the disguised weaver, while the king just stands there completely shamefaced. That is fundamentally the panic of creators who realize they are no longer in control of the narrative.
The narrative has a life of its own now.
Right. Other wisdom traditions, like Stoicism or early Buddhist texts, discuss this concept extensively regarding non-attachment.
Oh, that's a great connection.
You must do the work, raise the child, write the poem, build the business, but you must detach from the outcome because the outcome is entirely out of your jurisdiction.
And ironically, it's the weaver who is about to get the ultimate brutal lesson in outcomes being out of his jurisdiction.
It really is.
He built this divine mask, he set this audacious narrative in motion, and now reality is going to demand that his fake identity actually perform a miracle.
This is where the story shifts from a romantic caper into a profound study of identity and courage.
It gets so intense.
It does, because the king, King Valor, eventually gets over his shame because he actually convinces himself of the lie.
He buys into the disguise.
Hook, line, and sinker. He thinks, wait, my son-in-law is literally the supreme god Vishnu. My kingdom is untouchable.
Which makes him incredibly reckless.
Yes. Acting on that false confidence, he starts acting belligerently toward neighboring kingdoms. Unsurprisingly, an enemy army marches on the city and lays siege to it.
And the king isn't even slightly worried.
Not at all.
He just tells his daughter, hey, go tell your husband to wipe out the enemy army.
Just a casual request for a god.
This is the ultimate manifestation of imposter syndrome. Think about the weaver sitting in his room looking at his wooden bird. He is just a guy who knows how to operate a loom. And now he is expected to single-handedly annihilate a besieging army.
The architecture of the mask has become a prison. He realizes he is trapped by the very disguise that gave him everything.
Let's break down his internal monologue, because he actually thinks through his options systematically.
He's very rational about it.
Right. He figures if he gets on the bird and flies away, fleeing the city, the king will realize he's a fraud. His reputation will be ruined, the city will fall, and he loses the princess forever.
He is dead in terms of his identity in his life.
Yeah. So he is faced with a binary choice, the certainty of death or the preservation of his mask. And he makes a decision that defies all logic.
It really does.
The text explicitly states his internal resolution. He chooses to die against the enemy. He decides to mount the mechanical Garuda, fly out over the battlefield, and throw literally throw money from the palace roof.
Just an incredible visual.
He fully expects the enemy archers to shoot him out of the sky. He plans to paralyze the crowds with the sheer spectacle of a god dying in battle, rather than admit he is a weaver.
He commits to the bit.
He really commits.
He commits so completely that he is willing to die for the illusion. And this is where the narrative takes a turn into pure philosophical comedy.
I love this part.
Because the actual literal gods up in heaven are watching this whole thing unfold.
They're watching the live stream.
Basically, yeah. Brahma looks over at the real Vishnu and says, you might want to look down there. There's a mortal in your exact outfit about to get slaughtered by an army.
Oh, someone's wearing your brand.
Right. And if he dies wearing your face, mortals are going to think you died. It's going to be a PR nightmare for the divine.
It's a brilliant twist. Because the weaver's commitment to the mask is so absolute, so unflinching in the face of certain death, he actually forces the universe to align with his deception.
He manifests it.
Yeah, he creates a scenario where reality has to bend to accommodate his audacity. The real Vishnu is forced to enter the wooden bird's body to grant the weaver actual divine power, just to save his own reputation.
It's amazing.
The weaver destroys the army, not because he possessed secret power, but because he refused to break character when the stakes were mortal.
And that is the crux of the lesson.
Well, I have to say, I love this story, but I'm struggling a bit with the takeaway here.
Why is that?
Is the core wisdom really just fake it till you make it and eventually God will bail you out? Because if that's the lesson, that feels incredibly dangerous and reckless to apply to modern life.
No, it's much deeper than that.
Okay, help me out.
The transformative insight here is about the power of stepping fully into immense responsibilities, even if you acquired them accidentally or through sheer audacity.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Let's go back to your analogy of modern imposter syndrome. Imagine you embellish your resume slightly to get a high-level management job.
You wore a mask to get the job.
Right. Suddenly, a massive crisis hits the company. You feel like a total fraud. You have two choices. You can run away, admit you don't belong, and let the team collapse.
Or
you step fully into the terrifying shoes of a leader, make the hard calls, and act with the courage the role demands, even if you are shaking inside.
Oh, wow. So it's the idea that by playing the role of the brave leader, you actually manifest the bravery required to survive the crisis.
Exactly.
The mask of courage eventually becomes your actual face.
Precisely. The enduring wisdom isn't about maintaining a lie for the sake of ego. It's about recognizing that sometimes the roles we play, the masks we put on demand, a version of ourselves we didn't know we possess.
We grow into the mask.
Yes, by choosing courage in the face of certain failure, rather than shrinking back into his old small identity as a weaver, he summoned the real skills represented allegorically by the god's intervention needed to survive.
That reframes imposter syndrome entirely.
It makes it a catalyst for growth.
Oh, so for the listener, here's your practical reflection for this section. Where in your life are you playing a role that feels too big for you?
A great question to sit with.
Maybe you just became a parent, or you got a massive promotion, or you committed to a huge creative project. You feel like a common weaver wearing a Vishnu costume.
Terrified of being found out.
Right. How might fully committing to the responsibilities of that role without flinching actually summon the exact skills you need to survive it? It's a shift from asking, am I worthy of this mask, to, am I willing to bear the weight of this mask?
And that question of bearing weight leads us perfectly into our next narrative.
Oh, yes.
Because this next one deals with how we misjudge the weight and intent of the people around us based on the masks they present.
We are moving away from the high-flying drama of the weaver and down into a much more grounded, literally subterranean story.
Yes, the story of the Brahmin in the well.
Okay, so we have a Brahmin, a holy man, an educated pillar of society walking through a forest.
Right.
He hears cries for help and finds a dry well. Trapped at the bottom are a few entities, but for our purposes, we are focusing on two of them, a snake and a human goldsmith.
Quite the odd couple.
Yeah, and the Brahmin decides to pull him out.
Now, I want you to pay close attention to the dialogue and the explicit boundaries set in this interaction.
The boundaries are super interesting here.
When the Brahmin goes to rescue the snake is remarkably upfront. It tells him, we bite only when provoked or frightened.
Laying it all out there.
It states its nature clearly and without apology. There is no deception.
I found that fascinating. The snake is basically saying, look, I am a deadly predator. I appreciate the lift out of this well, but please respect my personal space or my biology will compel me to kill you.
Very clear terms of engagement.
It's a completely transparent transaction. But then the Brahmin rescues the goldsmith, a fellow human being. And the goldsmith leans heavily into the trappings of civilization.
He plays his role perfectly.
He invites the Brahmin back to his home, offering, as the text specifically notes, water for the feet, soft drink. He plays the role of the perfectly civilized, profusely grateful host.
And yet, the underlying tension in the fable and the broader context of the Panchatantra implies a looming danger from the goldsmith that simply isn't present with the snake.
Yeah, and this narrative directly challenges our modern assumptions about civility and where true danger lies.
It really flips our expectations.
I'll admit, when I first read this, I felt a lot of friction.
Oh, why is that?
I thought, wait a minute. The snake is a literal venomous reptile. The goldsmith is offering a foot wash and a beverage. Shouldn't human civilization, represented by hospitality and good manners, be inherently safer than the wild?
You would think so.
Right. Why is the text telling us to be more wary of the guy offering soft drinks than the venomous predator?
Because it is addressing the profound complexity of human deception, which we almost always cloak in civility.
Civility as a mask.
Exactly. The snake is honest about its nature. Its boundaries are violently clear. You know exactly where you stand with a snake, which means you know how to protect yourself.
Right. You just don't step on it.
But the goldsmith, however, uses the rituals of civilized hospitality to mask complex, ulterior motives. Remember the context we talked about earlier? This is a manual for statecraft.
Oh, right.
An assassin doesn't usually approach you with a drawn sword while screaming. They approach you with a smile, a bow, and a poisoned cup of wine.
It's the danger of the smiling associate. If we translate this to modern networking and business, it is incredibly relevant. We often radically misjudge where the true danger lies in our professional lives.
We really do. We misallocate our defensive energy.
We spend all our energy worrying about our open competitors, the snakes of our industry who are aggressively and publicly trying to beat us.
Because they're obvious threats.
Right. We know their game, so we can build defenses against them. But we completely drop our guard around the person who takes us out for coffee, smiles, asks about our kids, praises our work.
And then quietly steals our client list or sabotages a promotion.
Exactly. We confuse polite manners with true alignment of values.
That is a brilliant way to put it. The goldsmith's mask is woven entirely from societal norms. It's a very comfortable mask for the victim to look at, which makes it incredibly effective at bypassing our internal threat detection systems.
It hacks our social programming.
Yes. The text is warning us that the most dangerous traps are often set in comfortable rooms, accompanied by polite conversation and a soft drink.
It's a call to look past the performance of gratitude and evaluate the actual track record and character of the individual. Just because someone knows which fork to use at a dinner party doesn't mean they won't stab you in the back with it.
That is the exact cynical, survivalist wisdom the Panchatantra is trying to impart.
It's dark, but it's practical.
Very practical. And it sets up a fascinating contrast for our final story.
I am so ready for this final story.
Let's review where we've been. We've seen the heron who maliciously constructed a mask of piety. We've seen the weaver who audaciously built a mask of divinity. And we've seen the goldsmith hiding behind a culturally sanctioned mask of civility.
Right. In all those cases, the mask was a choice.
Yes, a deliberate strategy. But what happens when you don't choose your mask at all? What happens when a new identity is violently shoved onto you?
That brings us to the tragedy and, honestly, the dark comedy of the dyed jackal.
Such a great fable.
This might be my favorite visual from the entire deep dive. Let me paint the picture. We have a jackal who has wandered a little too close to a human city.
A risky move for a wild animal.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Suddenly, he is spotted and chased by a pack of city dogs. The source text is very evocative here. It describes the dogs with pointed teeth and awful barking.
It's a terrifying moment for him.
The jackal is absolutely terrified. He is fleeing for his life, operating on pure, blind panic. In his desperate scramble to escape, he runs into the shop of a dyer, and he accidentally falls face first into a massive, deep vat of indigo dye.
Just plunges right in.
Yeah, and when he eventually crawls out of the vat, his entire physical identity has been erased and replaced. He is completely, vibrantly blue.
Smurf jackal.
Exactly. The dogs don't even recognize him as a jackal anymore, so they leave him alone. He survives, but he now possesses a brand new identity, born entirely out of accident and cowardice.
It is the ancient equivalent of going viral accidentally.
Oh, that is such a good modern parallel.
We see this phenomenon constantly in the modern digital age. Someone posts a goofy video while they're stressed out, or they get caught in the background of a news broadcast making a weird face.
And overnight, they become a meme.
Right. Suddenly, they have a massive platform. Millions of followers, brand deals, and a new public identity that they did absolutely nothing to earn.
They just fell into the digital indigo vat.
Exactly. They have zero idea how to maintain it, but they are thrust onto the stage anyway.
That analogy is spot on. And the contrast with the weaver is what makes this story the thematic conclusion of our discussion today. Think about the structural differences between them.
They're polar opposites.
Right. The weaver designed his mask. He had the help of a true friend. He understood the mechanics of his deception. And crucially, he committed to the weight of it. He owned the audacity of his choice.
He took responsibility for the illusion.
Yes. But the jackal did none of that. His mask was an accident. He was just running from barking dogs.
So what does the jackal do with this new blue identity? I mean, when the weaver got his mask, he used it to get the girl and eventually save the city. Does the jackal rise to the occasion?
No. And that is where the core wisdom of this fable lies. When the jackal returns to the forest, the other animals, the lions, tigers, and elephants, they are terrified of this strange blue creature they've never seen before.
They assume he is a divine being.
Right, because he looks so unnatural. Instead of coming clean, the jackal realizes he can use this accidental mask to bully them. He sets himself up as a king.
A tyrant, really.
Yes, he treats the other animals terribly, banishing his fellow jackals so they don't give away his secret.
He lets the unearned power go straight to his head.
Completely. But because he didn't build the identity, because he hasn't developed the internal fortitude required to maintain a position of actual leadership, his mask is incredibly fragile.
It's just a coat of paint.
Exactly. Eventually, he is sitting on his fake throne, and he hears the distant howl of a pack of regular jackals. The sound triggers his deepest, truest nature. His natural instinct overrides his fake blue exterior, and he throws his head back and howls in response.
He just can't help himself.
No, it's biological. And the other animals instantly recognize the sound. They realize he isn't a god, he's just a fraud painted blue. And they immediately tear him apart.
Oh, wow. So the accidental mask doesn't just fail to protect him, it actively becomes the instrument of his destruction.
It's what gets him killed.
If he had just stayed a regular jackal, he might have been okay. But because he tried to inhabit a mask he didn't earn and didn't have the discipline to maintain, it killed him.
Exactly. Identities forced upon us by circumstance or masks we adopt purely out of panic are inherently fragile. They lack structural integrity.
They can't hold up under stress.
Right. When real pressure is applied, when the instinctual urge to howl arises, the mask shatters. But identities we intentionally build, even if they start as audacious fictions like the Weavers, hold power because they are backed by conscious will, discipline, and absolute commitment.
That is such a heavy, brilliant distinction, the intentional mask versus the accidental mask.
It really makes you think.
It forces you to look at your own life and do a rigorous audit of the roles you are playing.
An identity audit.
Yes. Are you playing a role because you consciously chose it, engineered it, and are willing to bear the massive weight of it? Or are you just a blue jackal, hoping nobody notices you're faking it until the pressure makes you crack?
It demands radical honesty with oneself. The Panchatantra, through all these talking animals, divine impersonators, and terrified jackals, is ultimately holding a mirror up to human nature.
It's holding us accountable.
It asks us to examine the uncomfortable gap between who we are, who we pretend to be, and who we are truly willing to become when our lives are on the line.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground.
We really have.
We've looked at the predatory heron's mask of piety and how it weaponizes our empathy.
A chilling reminder to watch out for performative grief.
We've unpacked the weaver's audacious mask of divinity and the sheer power of committing to the roles we assume.
The architecture of audacity.
We've examined the goldsmith's dangerous mask of civility and how manners can blind our threat detection.
The smiling assassin with a soft drink.
And finally, we've seen the tragedy of the jackal's fragile, accidental mask.
And through it all, the underlying message remains fiercely consistent. The masks we wear shape our reality, for better or for worse.
They're tools of survival, but they require immense discipline to wield safely.
Absolutely.
So to you listening right now, I want to leave you with one last thread to pull on as you go about your day. Think about the elegant costume your closest friend wears, or the dyer's vat you might have stumbled into recently.
Good things to reflect on.
Look closely at the roles you play at work, at home, in your relationships. Are your masks serving your true intentions? Are they helping you build something meaningful? Or are you just hiding from the barking dogs?
A powerful question to end on.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present. where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.